Hello and welcome. My name is Alan and we are back with more No, not that. We are actually back with more Greek mythology. Don't know where I was going, but we're going to try to finish up this particular chapter here, dealing with tales of lovers. And we're starting with Baucis and Philemon. So let's get into this. Ovid is the only source for this story. It shows especially when his love of details and the skillful way he uses them to make a fairy tale seem realistic. The Latin names of the gods are used. In the Phrygian hill country there was once two trees which all the peasants near and far pointed out as a great marvel. And no wonder, for one was an oak and the other a linden, yet they grew from a single trunk. The story of how this came about is a proof of the immeasurable power of the gods, and also the way they reward the humble and the pious. Sometimes, when Jupiter was tired of eating ambrosia and drinking nectar up in Olympus, and even a little weary of listening to Apollo's lyre and watching the Graces dance, he would come down to the earth, disguise himself as a mortal, and go looking for adventures. His favorite companion on these tours was Mercury, the most entertaining of all the gods and shrewdest and the most resourceful. On this particular trip, Jupiter had determined to find out how hospitable the people of Phrygia were. Hospitality was, of course, very important to him, since all guests, all who seek shelter in a strange land, were under his special protection. The two gods accordingly took the appearance of poor wayfarers and wandered through the land, knocking at each lowly hut or great house they came to and asking for food and a place to rest in. Not one would admit them. Every time they were dismissed insolently and the door barred against them. They made trial of hundreds. All treated them the same way. At last they came upon a little hovel of the humblest sort, poorer than any they had yet found, and the roof made only of reeds. But here, when they knocked, the door was opened wide, and a cheerful voice bade them enter. They had to stoop to pass through the low entrance, and but once inside they found themselves in a snug and very clean room, where a kindly faced old man and woman welcomed them in the friendliest fashion and bustled about to make them more comfortable. The old man set a bench near the fire and told them to stretch out on it and rest their tired limbs, and the old woman threw a soft covering over it. Her name was Baucis, she told the strangers, and her husband was called Philemon. They had lived in the cottage all their married life and had always been happy. "We are poor folk," she said, "but poverty isn't so bad when you're willing to own up to it, and a contented spirit is a great help too. All the while she was talking, she was busy doing things for them. The coals under the ashes on the dark hearth she fanned alive until a cheerful fire was burning. Over this she hung a little kettle full of water, and just as it began to boil, her husband came in with a fine cabbage he had got from the garden. Into the kettle it went with a piece of the pork which was hanging from one of the beams. While this cooked, Balkis set the table and with her trembling old hands. One table leg was too short, but she propped it up with a bit of broken dish. On the board she placed olives and radishes and several eggs, which she had roasted in the ashes. By this time the cabbage and bacon were done, and the old man pushed two rickety couches up to the table and bade his guest recline and eat. Presently he brought them cups of beechwood and an earthenware mixing bowl, which held some wine very like vinegar, plentifully diluted with water. Philemon, however, was clearly proud and happy at being able to add such cheer to the supper, and he kept on the watch to refill each cup as soon as it was emptied. The two old folks were so pleased and excited by the success of their hospitality that only very slowly a strange thing dawned upon them. The mixing bowl kept full, no matter how many cups were poured out from it. The level of the wine stayed the same up to the brim. As they saw this wonder, each looked in terror at each other, and dropping their eyes, they prayed silently. Then, in quavering voices and trembling all over, they begged their guests to pardon the poor refreshments they had offered. "We have a goose," the old man said, "which we ought to have given our lordships. But if you will only wait, it shall be done at once." To catch the goose, however, proved beyond their powers. They tried in vain until they were worn out, while Jupiter and Mercury watched them greatly entertained. But when both Philemon and Bacchus had to give up the chase, panting and exhausted, the gods felt that the time had come for them to take action. They were really very kind. "You have been hosts to gods," they said, "and you shall have your reward. This wicked country which despises the poor stranger will be bitterly punished, but not you." They then escorted the two out of the hut and told them to look around them. To their amazement, all they saw was water. The whole countryside had disappeared. A great lake surrounded them. Their neighbors had not been good to the old couple. Nevertheless, standing there, they wept for them. But of a sudden, their tears were dried by an overwhelming wonder. Before their eyes, the tiny, lowly hut which had been their home for so long was turned into a stately, pillared temple of whitest marble with a golden roof. "Good people," Jupiter said, "ask whatever you want and you shall have your wish." The old people exchanged a hurried whisper when Philemon spoke. "Let us be your priest, guarding this temple for you. And, oh, since we have lived so long together, let neither of us have to live alone. Grant us that we may die together." The gods assented. well pleased with the two. A long time they had served in that grand building, and the story does not say whether they ever missed their little cozy room with the cheerful hearth. But one day, standing before the marble and golden magnificent, they fell to talking about the former life, which they had so which had been so hard and yet so happy. By now both were in extreme old age. Suddenly, as they exchanged memories, each saw the other putting forth leaves. Then bark was growing around them. They had time only to cry, "Farewell, dear companion." As the words passed their lips, they became trees, but still they were together. The linden and the oak grew from one trunk. From far and wide, people came to admire the wonder and always wreaths of flowers hung on the branches in honor of the pious and faithful pair. Endymion. I have taken this story from the 3rd century poet Theocritus, who tells it in the true Greek manner, simply and with restraint. This youth, whose name is so famous that has a very short history. Some of the poets say he was a king, some a hunter, but most of them say he was a shepherd. All agree that he was a youth of surpassing beauty, and that this was the cause of his singular fate. Endymion the shepherd, as his flock he guarded. She, the moon, Selene, saw him, loved him, sought him. Coming down from heaven to the glade on Latmus, kissed him, lay beside him. Blessed is his fortune. Evermore he slumbers, tossing not nor turning. Endymion the shepherd. He never woke to see the shining silvery form bending over him. In all the stories about him, he sleeps forever, immortal, but never conscious. Wondrously beautiful, he lies on the mountainside, motionless and remote as if in death, but warm and living. And night after night the moon visits him and covers him with her kisses. It is said that the magic slumber was her doing. She lulled him to sleep so that she might always find him and caress him as she pleased. But it is said, too, that her passion brings her only a burden of pain, fraught with many sighs. Daphne. Ovid alone tells this tale. Only a Roman could have written it. A Greek poet would never have thought of an elegant dress and coiffure for the wood nymph. Daphne was another of those independent, love and marriage hating young huntresses who are met with so often in mythological stories. She is said to have been Apollo's first love. It is not strange that she fled from him. One unfortunate maiden after another, beloved of the gods, had to kill her child secretly or be killed herself. The best such a one could expect was exile, and many women thought that worse than death. The ocean nymphs who visited Prometheus on the crag in the Caucasus spoke only of the most ordinary common sense when they said to him, "May you never, oh, never behold me, sharing the couch of a god. May none of the dwellers in heaven draw near to me ever. Such love as the high gods know from those who none can hide. May that never be mine. To war with a god lover is not war, it is despair." Daphne would have agreed completely, but indeed she did not want any mortal lovers either. Her father, the river god Peneus, was greatly tried because she refused all the handsome and eligible young men who wooed her. He would scold her gently and lament, "Am I never to have a grandson?" But when she threw her arms around him and coaxed him, "Father, dearest, let me be like Diana," he would yield, and she would be off to the deep woods, blissful in her freedom. But at last Apollo saw her, and everything ended for her. She was hunting, her dress short to the knee, her arms bare, her hair in wild disarray. Nevertheless, she was enchantingly beautiful. Apollo thought, what would she not look like properly dressed and with her hair nicely arranged? The idea made the fire that was devouring his heart blaze up even more fiercely, and he started off in pursuit. Daphne fled, and she was an excellent runner. Even Apollo, for a few minutes, was hard put to overtake her. Still, of course, he soon gained. As he ran, he sent his voice ahead of him, entreating her, persuading her, reassuring her. "Do not fear," he called. "Stop and find out who I am. No rude rustic or shepherd. I am the Lord of Delphi, and I love you." But Daphne flew on, even more frightened than before. If Apollo was indeed following her, the case was hopeless, but she was determined to struggle to the very end. It had all but come, she felt, his breath upon her neck, but there in front of her the trees opened and she saw her father's river. She screamed to him, "Help me! Father, help me!" At the words, a dragging numbness came upon her. Her feet seemed rooted in the earth she had been so swiftly speeding over. Bark was enclosing her. Leaves were sprouting forth. She had been changed into a tree, a laurel. Apollo watched the transformation with dismay and grief. "O fairest of maidens, you are lost to me," he mourned. "But at least you shall be my tree. With your leaves my victors shall wreathe their brows. You shall have your part in all my triumphs. Apollo and this laurel shall be joined together wherever songs are sung and stories told." The beautiful shining-leaved tree seemed to nod its waving head as if in happy consent. Alpheus and Arethusa. This story is told in full only by Ovid. There is nothing noteworthy in his treatment of it. The verse at the end is taken from the Alexandrian poet Moscus. In Ortygia, an island which formed part of Syracuse, the greatest city of Sicily, there is a sacred spring called Arethusa. Once, however, Arethusa was not water or even a water nymph, but a fair young huntress and a follower of Artemis. Like her mistress, she would have nothing to do with men. Like her, she loved hunting in the freedom of the forest. One day, tired and hot from the chase, she came upon a crystal clear river deeply shaded by silvery willows. No more delightful place for a bath could be imagined. Arethusa undressed and slipped into the cool, delicious water. For a while she swam idly to and fro in utter peace. Then she seemed to feel something stir in the depths beneath her. Frightened, she sprang to the bank, and as she did so, she heard a voice. "Why such haste, fairest maiden?" Without looking back, she fled away from the stream to the woods, and ran with all the speed her fear gave her. She was hotly pursued, and by one stronger, if not swifter than she. The unknown god to her to stop. The unknown called to her to stop. He told her he was the god of the river, Alpheus, and that he was following her only because he loved her. But she wanted none of him. She had but one thought, to escape. It was a long race, but the issue was never in doubt. He could keep on running longer than she. Worn out at last, Arethusa called to her goddess, and not in vain. Artemis changed her into a spring of water, and cleft the earth so that the tunnel was made under the sea from Greece to Sicily. Arethusa plunged down and emerged in Ortygia, where the place in her spring bubbles up is holy ground, sacred to Artemis. But it is said that even so she is not free of Alpheus. The story is that the god, changing back into a river, followed her through the tunnel, and that now his water mingles with hers in the fountain. They say that often Greek flowers have been seen coming up from the bottom, and that if a wooden cup is thrown into the Alpheus in Greece, it will reappear in Arethusa's well in Sicily. Alpheus makes his way far under the deep with his waters, travels to Arethusa with bridal gifts, fair leaves and flowers. Teacher of strange ways is love, that knavish boy, maker of mischief. With his magical spell, he taught a river to dive. But yeah, that is the end of that chapter. Next chapter is the quest for the Golden Fleece. One of the big stories in Greek history. But yeah. So we finished up the chapter on lovers and enrapturement, I'll say. because it wasn't nearly just adoration of beauty. It was, oh, I'm in love. And often it was a god. Goddess of the moon, Selene, came down for Endymion. Daphne, I don't think there was actually a god that pursued her. Oh, Apollo did, that's right. Apollo pursued her. And then Alphaeus and Arethusa, she was pursued by the river god. So Zeus is not the only horny god. Let that be a lesson when you think about Greek stories of the deities. Zeus is usually the one thought of as being a horny old god, often coming to Earth to satisfy his lustful urges. But clearly, some of the other deities of the Greek pantheon are just as lustful. Yeah. Selene, or Selene, I'm not sure which one is the proper pronunciation, but yeah, she's kind of even more devious. It's like, I'm infatuated with you, so you will be immortal, but you'll never be awake. And it's like, okay. But, yeah. Like I said, next chapter, the quest for the golden fleece. I think that is also known as Jason and the Argonauts. You have a number of the big name heroes in Greek mythos on that journey. I think we have Atalanta, Hercules, Jason, of course. A lot of demigods. You know, half-breed gods born from the Greek pantheon of deities. But yeah, we'll end this episode there. As always, educate thyself. Think, read, study, learn. Someone tells you something you have trouble believing? Ask them to cite their sources. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. Until then, later.